Hey everyone, it's time to finally, after over half a year, talk about Gothic 2 Night of the Raven, now that I have finished playing through it, and holy, this might be a long video. Most likely longer than the original Gothic 1 video. Anyway, if you are new to the channel, welcome! I'm Macqo, and this is my channel, and I came to a conclusion that nowadays games are kinda bad unless they're indie, so now I make reviews and retrospectives on older titles, and sometimes newer titles if they are game series that I actually care about. And sometimes I just make opinion videos where I just yap about something that's been on my mind. I hope you enjoy your stay, and now let's talk a bit about how I'm going to approach this video. Because this is an RPG, I cannot go about this video without talking about the story and the way it unfolds, so here's what I'll do. I will start off by giving you some basic information on Gothic 2, then I'll start going over the story, and whenever I feel like it's important, I'll interrupt the story and I'll talk about problems that I might have encountered, talk about mechanics, talk about positives and negatives, and then go back to the story. Just weave between them. Also, disclaimer, I will not talk about every side quest I would do in this game. I will definitely mention some of them, but not all of them, since I do not want to make this video like 5 hours long. Alrighty, so before I start yapping, if you'll enjoy the video, please leave a like, a sub, and feel free to comment. I read through all of them. It helps me out a lot and I appreciate every single one of you watching. Okay. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the actual video. So, Gothic 2 was made in 2002 by a German studio Piranha Bytes, and it's obviously a sequel to Gothic. The Night of the Raven expansion was created the following year and essentially rebalanced the entirety of the game, because apparently it was too easy and very much similar to Gothic 1 in that way. So the game was made harder, stuff got nerfed, mobs got rebalanced. From my research, I can tell you that Gothic 2 originally was supposed to be an expansion called Gothic Sequel, which was supposed to be almost an entirely different thing compared to what is happening in Gothic 2. But works on it were cancelled a couple months after it started, and Piranha Bytes just started working on a sequel in the form of Gothic 2 instead of creating the Gothic Sequel expansion. And you might notice that there wasn't really that much of a technical jump between Gothic 1 and Gothic 2 when you're watching this video. Well, that's because Gothic 2 runs on a proprietary Zengen engine that was developed by the studio. It's the same engine that was used to create Gothic 1, just slightly modified for the purposes of the game. And that is equally a good and a bad thing, specifically if the game is played on modern PCs, but I will go into some of that later in the video. Oh yeah, also please do keep in mind that even though I've already finished this game twice before, each time taking a different path, my last playthrough before this one was over 2 years ago, and the playthrough I will be going through right now, I am approaching as if I were a new-ish player, someone who played through Gothic 1, but has not played Gothic 2. Alright, with all that exposition about the game itself, let's talk about the intro. You see, immediately after we start the game, we can tell that the ending of Gothic 1 was retconned. At the end of Gothic 1, we, as the nameless hero, have beaten an archdemon dubbed the Sleeper, and we were told that we managed to escape from a collapsing temple and live on to adventure. But at the end of Gothic 2, we are told that this is not what happened. When we've beaten the demon, the temple collapsed on top of us and we were knocked out for a couple of weeks. Essentially, the creators of the game retconned the ending of Gothic 1 for the sake of the narrative. Then, we got magically saved by Zardas, who has teleported us to his newly created tower outside of the colony, and we are instantly told that 2 new threats appeared. There's dragons that appeared in the mining colony not too long after we have banished the Sleeper, but also there's something else. There's been a large amount of tremors and earthquakes around the island, and it seems like it's connected to some ruins in the north of the island. And we should also check what is going on over there, along with the water mages that are already researching the ruins. Zardas also mentions at the beginning how we are alive only because of that overpowered runic armor we found before reaching the temple, and because we've spent so long buried under the Sleeper's temple, we've probably gotten very weak, as we were essentially in a coma for something close to a month. And that is the reason for why we are starting at level 0 in Gothic 2, even though we finished Gothic 1 around level 50 or even higher if we exploited the spawn demon trap. And I have two takes about this whole ordeal. Obviously, if the hero would have left the colony like he did at the end of Gothic 1, there would be literally no threat whatsoever. In fact, the nameless hero would be able to clear the whole island of Khorinis on his own with no more help, because of how powerful the runic armor was, and because he had the sword Uriziel, and because of how strong he's gotten overall due to constant fighting. Also, he would have been insanely rich considering how much magic ore he was carrying on him. Remember, the only reason ore was the currency in the colony instead of gold was because ore was commonly mined in the colony, unlike gold. But in the real world outside of the colony, that same magic ore's value increases like 200-fold, if not more. And so, when you look at the game in that context, it kind of makes sense that the ending of Gothic 1 was retconned if they wanted to create a large sequel to the game. But there's also another thought that went through my head. Why would we not be able to at least start the game on a bit higher level if we had finished Gothic 1 before and have the same file to load in? Obviously, it would be more of a pain to implement and have it, like, I don't know, start the game on level 5 or something if you have finished Gothic 1, but at least the rest of the game would not feel so painful at the beginning. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I'll talk about the difficulty later. After having a couple more ideas in my head, I came to a conclusion that I am fine with the hero going back down to level 0 just because of the narrative purposes, but I can also see the world in which that does not happen and we get a stronger start. Anyway, back to the actual story. Zardas tells us that to stop the evil dragons, we need to obtain an artifact called the Eye of Innos. That is, at the current moment, held by the Paladins, under the leadership of Lord Hagen, in a port town of Khorinis. So that is our task: get the Eye of Innos, go back to Zardas so he tells us what to do. At the end of our briefing with Zardas, we are told that we can take anything we want from his tower, although he does not really have much in here. So that is still very much fine, because we will need every item we can get to get through the early game. And I'll interrupt the flow of the story again to talk about the major difference in the narrative flow of the story. You see, in Gothic 1, we do not really start with any major quest that we need to do. We obviously wanted to escape the colony, and everything we did throughout the game was done to escape. Although somewhere in the middle of the game we've also obtained the secondary objective that would help us escape. We needed to kill the demon named the Sleeper, because it seemed like killing him would cause such a disturbance that the barrier could potentially vanish. And at the very beginning of the game we were given a letter to the Fire Mages to kind of push us in the direction of the main narrative, to give us a goal in a sense, but that whole task was optional, even though it seemed like something we had to do. Well, obviously later on the hero was told what needed to be done, his motivation and his goal was very much clear, and everything that was being done was deliberate in a sense. In Gothic 2, on the other hand, everything that the nameless hero does from the beginning is essentially Zardas' plot. We do not know our goal that would lead us to the end. All we know is that there are evil dragons that need to be dealt with, but we are told about it by Zardas. But that entire storyline, as you will see later on in the video, is very much guided by Zardas. He kind of serves as the main quest giver to the nameless hero, as someone who directly tells you what to do. And I'm not sure if I like that about Gothic 2. When I thought longer about it, it felt kind of like the hero stopped having his own agenda in a way, because now he became somewhat of an errand boy to Zardas. Anyway, when we leave Zardas' tower, we see a pathway that leads us to the city, according to what we've been told by the necromancer. But we also see a small pond to the left of the tower, and when we get down there, there's a cave with a bunch of goblins in it. If we manage to dispatch them, which we should be able to with some luck on the melee combat side, and thanks to a couple of spells that we have found in Zardas' tower, we might be able to go down a pathway into a tiny valley, where we see someone sitting right next to the campfire. And that someone is Lester, one of our original friends group from Gothic 1. When we walk up to him, he recognizes us, but then we get two dialogue options. We can either say that we recognize him and know his name, essentially acknowledging our relationship from Gothic 1, but we also get an option where we struggle to remember who he is, implicating that the time we spent under the rubble might have affected our memory. And I think that is a very cool way to resolve talking to characters from Gothic 1. If we've played the game before, we can act as if we know the characters and no further introductions are really needed. But if we select the amnesia option, we get a surprise reaction from the characters followed up by like 1 to 2 sentence explanations of what the player's relationship with the character was in Gothic 1. I will be acting as if I remember everyone from Gothic 1, seeing how I've finished the game at least twice by now. So, Lester tells us that ever since the fall of the barrier, he's been having nightmares and terrible headaches, and he could barely sleep. Also, he tells us that Zardes' tower just kind of appeared overnight one day. So from that we can deduce that there was no real construction to be had, so my wild guess is that Zardes kind of just enchanted a tower into existence one evening and then brought us back. That, in my eyes, would make Zardes even more suspicious than he was at the end of Gothic 1. But hey, the nameless hero just kind of brushes that off, tells Lester that said tower is the Tower of Zardes, and that we should go to see him. Maybe he's got a solution to Lester's headache. Also, we get a tip on how to get into the city from Lester, and that is to gather at least 10 of any type of herb, and then we tell a guard that we work for Constantino, the city's alchemist. After all that, if we go back up the way we came in and actually go down the path, we notice that someone's fighting a small group of goblins right next to the road. That someone would be Cavalorn. He tells us that he's been running errands for the water mages as a member of a group named the Circle of Water. But then he got jumped by some bandits and knocked unconscious, and he had something important on him that he needs to get back. We offer some help with that. Then we head together to a nearby cave and let Cavalorn take care of all bandits for us. Just like in Gothic 1, there's an escort mechanic, so whenever we are escorted or are escorting other characters, or if we summon minions, they are all treated as the same party as us, so we get the full XP from anything that the party members kill. And I would highly recommend utilizing the escort mechanic a lot, because my god are the fights a pain at the start. So, after clearing that wave, we received the item that Cavalorn had to deliver to the water magicians, but he says that he's running short on time and asks us to deliver a letter to magician Vatras, who's preaching in a city. We obviously take the letter and move on further down the road, where we notice a shrine to Innos, and I would recommend taking the stuff around the shrine, as well as praying at the shrine and paying 100 gold whenever you have a chance. As long as you have not prayed yet during that day, of course. You see, the Shrine of Innos gives the player bonuses based on whatever guild the player joins, but also, if you do not pay the whole 100 gold, it's only a chance that this would happen. It's a toss-up between 1 strength, 1 dex, or 1 mana, and later bonus health once you reach the limit on the other attributes. And every attribute can be upgraded 10 times, so I would say that this whole ordeal is kind of worth it as something that could potentially save you a bunch of learning points. After that prayer at the statue, we notice city walls as well as a farm. If we go to the farm, we can do some tiny errands for the farmer to obtain either a little bit of money or get sold the farmer's clothes a bit cheaper. And I would always suggest just taking the clothes. The tasks that we are told to perform include gathering all the beetroot that is on the fields, getting a frying pan for the farmer's wife, as well as getting a bottle of alcohol for some farmhands. Then we get our clothes from the farmer, put them on and leave for the city. And we get greeted by some suspicious figure named Greg that wants to get in the city and ask us for help. He gets offended by any solution we give him outside of handing him the farmer clothes. So we just give him the clothes and use a different solution to enter the city. Inside the city, we are greeted by a paladin named Lothar, who tells us about the rules within the city, and then proceeds to get angrier and angrier when we mention the existence of dragons, the need to meet Lord Hagen, and that we know of the Eye of Innos. We are told that only citizens of the city may enter the upper city, and only some special members of certain guilds may see Lord Hagen, so now we need to become a citizen. And to do that, we need to become an apprentice at one of the 3 masters that seek an apprentice. We can either become an apprentice of a blacksmith Harad, the bowmaker Posper, or the alchemist Constantino. And not only do we need to get accepted by every one of these masters, we need to also get acceptance from a merchant Matteo and from Forben the carpenter. From every one of them we gather quests to do certain things, like getting skins of 10 wolves, or getting an orc weapon, or getting rid of some bandits, or even just collecting a debt from someone. These quests kind of lead us into some other quests, and we also get pushed into exploring the rest of the city. So we talk around a bit more, find the water mage Vatras, give him the item we needed to give him, talk to him a little bit, and mention that we'd like to join the Circle of Water. Then we get interviewed by him to see if we can be trusted, and if we answer every question he asks truthfully, we pass the test, and we are given the quest that will lead us into joining the Circle of Water, as well as getting to the area of the Night of the Raven expansion. We are told that there's been many people missing from the town lately, and that if we solve the mystery, we may join the Circle of Water. We are also told to go down the docks to Lares to give him an ornament and tell him that he is to fulfill his task. After that, if we go down the path right next to Harad's smithy, we get down to the docks of Kyrnis, where we meet Lares, the guy who was leading New Camp's rogues in Gothic 1. It seems that he also became the member of Circle of Water, although this is not as surprising as Cavalorn joining, seeing as people from the New Camp were cooperating with water magicians anyway. We talk to him for a bit and he tells us he can train us, and he also mentions that Lee and the mercenaries have set up on a farm of a landlord named Onar, somewhere further in the island, and that he can help us joining them if we want. Then we give him the ornament and he seems really annoyed that he's got to fulfill his task, which would be going to the water mages on the other side of the island and handing him the ornament. We offer we can help with that, and thus we have two possible escort paths available. If we find a replacement for Lares at the docks, he will escort us to the Honor's farm as well as to the water mages, meaning that he will give us a lot of XP for doing so. Overall, I do not want to spend too much time talking about how the first act of the game goes, but let me tell you this. There's an absolute ton of side quests to do in Act 1, and I would recommend doing as many of them as possible. A lot of them are only available in Act 1, some of them are available in Act 2, but I would consider a lot of them just pure XP gain, because a bunch of these basically require you to just talk to a couple of NPCs, and you get experience for that. And some of these quests are actually fun. I would say that overall Act 1 and 2 is the strong point of Gothic 2, just like in Gothic 1, because of the abundance of things to do in the first two acts of the game. Although, I do need to mention that in Gothic 2, you get some side quests to do in the other acts of the game too, even if there aren't as many of them. And while I am on the topic of quests and XP gain, let's actually talk about the Gothic 2 system and how it works in Gothic 2 compared to Gothic 2 Night of the Raven version. You see, we still have the same attributes as our main skill points for raw stats. We get health every level, and just like in Gothic 1, it is exactly 12 health per level, so an equivalent of 1 cooked meat per level. And then we have mana points, which is responsible for our spellcasting ability, as well as strength and dexterity, which are responsible for our ability to use certain weapons and the damage that melee and ranged weapons deal respectively. Yes, in Gothic 2, dexterity is actually added to the damage calculations for ranged weapons, but I will talk about that later when I touch on combat. But outside of these 4 attributes, there are a couple of changes. Now, our proficiency with weapons works differently. We can still work on our one-handed and two-handed weapons, as well as our skill with bows and crossbows, but now instead of leveling up from the apprentice level to a fighter level to master level, unlocking new combos, higher range of shots, and higher chance to critically strike, we now have percentage chances to hit for full damage, instead of hitting a critical strike. And we do not just straight up upgrade from one level to another level to unlock new combos, now we need to hit certain percentage thresholds. We need 30% chance to hit to upgrade from adept to fighter or a shooter, and 60% to become a master. Now, on top of that, we still can learn circles of magic if we become a mage, although they are very much story locked, and we can learn secondary skills like sneaking, lockpicking, and getting trophies off of animals, as well as pickpocketing. In fact, I would very much recommend you all getting pickpocketing. I'm not going to spoil how you get it, but please just do it. You gain so much XP off of pickpocketing. It's insane. Anyway, we learn and increase all that by spending learning points at trainers. We get 10 learning points every time we level up. And here is a major difference between Gothic 2 and Night of the Raven release. You see, in base game only, leveling skills worked exactly the same as in Gothic 1. You would pay 1 learning point per 1 point of attributes, but that caused the same problem as in Gothic 1, meaning that if the player focused on, let's say, one type of attribute and ability at the start, he did not need to level up a lot to become very strong and to be able to steamroll through the rest of the game. Also, the attributes capped at 100, so your spike in power was very fast. In Night of the Raven, however, that got changed significantly. Now the attribute cap got raised to 200 above certain thresholds. These attributes started costing more learning points per attribute point, meaning that the stronger you got, the slower you gained the power at some point. The amount of learning points required to gain 1 attribute point would go up from 1 to 2 points, to 3 points, and at the end to 4 points. Meaning that if you put a lot of points into, let's say, strength, at later levels you would need to wait 2 levels to increase your strength by 5 again. That meant that progression at the beginning of the game was very much slowed down, because on top of that, the enemies got rebalanced to be stronger and give different amounts of experience, and on top of that, the weapon requirements for strength also got significantly increased, meaning that you needed to level up your character even more to be able to use mediocre weapons. But to kind of compensate that difficulty spike, there were some new items added to the game. Stone tablets, which can increase every attribute of the player permanently if we spend learning points to actually gain ability to read these tablets. So, was the rebalancing good? Honestly, it is hard to tell for me, because the only version of Gothic that I've ever played was the one with Night of the Raven enabled, and honestly that meant that I had a lot of problems leveling early, as every enemy encounter is very much deadly and kind of made me repeat the habit of quick save, quick load again. Oh yeah, you again have to mess around with the game files to enable quick saving and quick loading as well. And actually, since I'm already yapping about leveling and balance, let's actually talk about the combat and damage in this game right now. You see, the combat in this game is almost entirely the same as in Gothic 1, but the damage calculations are done differently. If you remember from my Gothic 1 video, the damage calculation for melee was very simple. The damage dealt would be calculated by this formula. It was weapon damage plus your strength minus enemy's armor. And the critical damage formula would also be simple, as it only doubled the weapon damage specifically, and that was it. Now, here's a change in Gothic 2. The damage formula, while it bases on the same attributes, it's different. Now the damage is calculated like this. You get weapon damage plus your strength minus enemy's armor minus 1, and you divide that by 10. But now there is a minimum damage dealt, equal to 5 hit points. So while you deal less damage to an enemy, at least now you know that even if you don't do the full damage, at least you chipped away some health, because in Gothic 1 there were enemies that were literally impossible to kill if you were not strong enough, and same works for the player character. So what is that percentage chance next to your weapon skill in the menu? It's essentially calculating whether you actually hit or just graze the enemy. The formula above is used for grazing the character, so not actually landing a good hit. There is no more critical strikes, so if you actually hit the enemy, the damage math is done by using the damage formula for normal hits from Gothic 1. The math on bows and crossbows is also slightly different, but it does work in favor of the player. The critical strike chance is gone. Now that percentage number just implies your accuracy with bows and crossbows, but the damage of bows is now actually the exact same as the damage calculations for melee from Gothic 1. Now instead of the damage being just weapon damage minus armor against missiles, it's your weapon damage plus your dexterity against armor against missiles. So it makes this dexterity a little bit more viable. Magic is essentially the same, but the fire spells actually count as magic damage now. And yeah, now that we've talked about leveling, let's talk a bit more about the quests and the NPC dialogues, and specifically how you can softlock yourself or even hardlock yourself out of some of these by performing certain actions out of order that the developers predicted. You see, many of the NPC interactions, in fact, I think all of them, are conditional and based on a thing called Daedalus script. And a lot of the states of NPCs, whether they have certain dialogue options available, whether they move from place A to place B, is governed by that script. And sometimes you can perform actions in-game in a way that would trigger the script to a state where you can no longer progress a quest because something got skipped over. In fact, I have had to download an app for editing save files to attempt to fix two things. First is Lares' escort dialogue. You see, if you ask Lares to escort you to the water mages to hand over the ornament, he will gladly do it. Then at the end he would hand you the ornament and tell you to run to the mages to hand it over. And the item is in his inventory up until that point. And then when he comes back to the city, you can ask him to lead you to Onar's farm. He will escort you and tell you where to go after he finishes escorting, and everything's great. But if you ask him to go to Onar's farm first, to do some quests there, and then you finally decide to push the storyline of the expansion, you cannot talk to him anymore, because the number that corresponds to his status, whether he escorted you to Onar's farm, is higher up than the number that corresponds to his status, whether he escorted you to the mages or not. So the game reads that as he's used up both escort options, and you are unable to even ask him to lead you somewhere. So I had to then edit the save file so that Lares' dialogue about escorting is reset, so that both dialogue options are available, and now I could start the quest for the expansion pack. Obviously, there's also a way where I could just use the console commands to give myself the ornament fragment, but I would consider that more of like cheating than actually just like fixing the save file so you have these dialogue options available again. Just because if you get the ornament, you just kind of like skip an entire like traveling process, and if you do the thing with Lares, you actually do it the way the devs intended it. And then there's the second quest that you can very much mess up without even knowing. You see, if you get escorted by Lares very early on in the game, you will go past a tavern, and Greg is at that tavern. You know, the same Greg that you gave the peasant, the farmer suit to. And he will talk to you, he will actually start the dialogue, starting a quest that would eventually lead to a cool treasure hunt side quest, since Greg is a pirate. But you see, to start the quest proper, you need to go into a cave with Greg. And while he will escort you to the cave, he will then leave the party and wait for you to get in a cave, dig out the treasure and talk to him. But here's the problem. There is a bunch of black goblins in there, and fighting groups of enemies at the start of the game is a death sentence, so you can either just kite the enemies back to Greg and accept that you will lose experience because him killing the enemies will not give you anything. Also, you will be risking your life because the enemies will still very much focus you and not Greg. Or you can try and kill everything, or leave the cave and come back later, but stronger. But the problem is, if you let Greg stay there for 24 hours, after that time, if you walk past him, but you won't have that treasure on you, he will ask you if you found anything. And since you do not have the treasure, the only answer you can give is that you have not found anything. Then Greg responds that he knew the bandits would have stolen his things and walks away, and that is the end of this side quest. Now, keep in mind, you can still dig up all the treasures that Greg has hidden, and you still get some XP for digging them up, but you cannot hand them over to Greg, because you have failed the quest. Therefore, you miss out on additional bits of XP. Now, why is that, you might think? Well, that's because the I have not found anything option is actually treated by the Daedalus script as a voice line where the hero lies to Greg and keeps the items for himself. There is no separate options of you just didn't find it yet. And I tried fixing these lines for like an hour so he would come back and I'd be able to talk to him, but no, I just could not do it. I'm probably just too stupid to do it. So do not be like me and approach him only when you feel like you can actually take the goblins on. Okay, back to the actual story. So, we do have quests for people inside the town of Khorinis, on the way gaining some XP ourselves, as well as via some additional escort quests, and eventually we can become an apprentice for either of the masters. I've selected Bosper because while you can do a very funny crafting exploit with Harad that is even more broken than the unfinished sword crafting exploit in Gothic 1, you can still get a very pretty penny from selling skins to Bosper, as he is giving you the actual market price of the item instead of a quarter of the value. Oh yeah, in Night of the Raven, selling value of items got nerfed from half of the item price to a quarter of the item price, with minimum gold being 1 piece. But yeah, now that we've become a citizen, we can enter the upper city, and we find out there that, well, we still cannot talk to Lord Hagen because only very special people can talk to him. So we are presented with a choice. We need to join a guild to be able to eventually meet Lord Hagen and tell him about the dragons. And so we will go ahead and join a guild. So let's introduce every single one briefly. The guilds in Gothic 2 are similar to Gothic 1, so you have your starting guild, and then later on, based off of the guild you've joined, you can progress to a higher tier. We can join the City Guard, which would be the easiest guild to join, as the only requirement to do so is to become a citizen. City Guard does not get a lot of new missions, but because they are very accessible, you get a decent armor for starters. They are very new player friendly and the easiest way to go talk to Hagen. The City Guard can later on join the Paladin ranks, who on top of being good with melee weapons and having a decent armor can also use certain spells very specific to them. We can also join the Mercenaries, who I would say narratively make the most sense considering how much time we spend around the Mercs and Lee in the first game after Act 2. But to do so, we need to go to Honor's farm, talk to Lee, and then we need to convince most of the named mercenaries in there that we are worthy of joining their ranks by doing some small tasks for them, kind of like in Gothic 1 when we tried to join the old camp. Later on, you can join the Dragon Hunters when you become a merc. You cannot obtain any more spells, so playing as a merc very much leans into the no magic playstyle. And then we can join the Fire Mages as a novice in their monastery. Now, that is definitely the hardest guild to kind of get into and get going with, as it requires 1000 gold pieces of a donation and a sheep on top of that. But you can bypass that requirement by doing a quest for a fire mage in town who has lost a statuette of Innos. And you may think, well, how do I even get this quest? I don't really see it anywhere, he will not mention it to me normally. Well, what you need to do is go talk to Laris, and when he mentions to you that he can help you become a mercenary, you can select a dialogue option saying that you would like to become a fire magician, and then he will tell you to go talk to Vatras. And when you talk to Vatras, he will tell you about what happened with the statuette, and then you can prompt that dialogue with the fire magician that resides in the city. And we can find that statuette in the same cave that Greg wants us to dig up his treasure in, just in the other part of it. And I would say that honestly, while narratively it makes the most sense for our hero to join the Mercs, just like he did in Gothic 1 in my playthrough, in Gothic 2 I decided to join the Fire Mages, and I honestly do not regret it, because later on there's a lot of lore drops that we get as a Fire Mage that we do not get as any other character. In fact, there are some unique interactions between certain characters and you if you are a fire magician, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So here's the thing, while if you join the City Guard and the Mercs, you pretty much instantly upon joining get the ability to go to Lord Hagen and talk to him. You don't get that as a fire magician initially, because when you join the guild, you join as a novice who cannot even cast spells yet and is not a full member of the Brotherhood of Fire. You are supposed to just run errands for fire magicians and upkeep the monastery, and then after you perform a bunch of tasks there, you can enter the library where you are supposed to learn about the way you could become a fire magician. And in our case, we found an expedited way to do so, and that would be the Test of Fire, which are free trials that we need to undertake. Luckily, all these free trials kind of flow into one another. One of the trials requires you to craft a fire arrow rune. to prove that you are able to craft your own spells as well as use them, proving you are worthy of becoming a magician. Another test requires you to solve a short riddle that will tell you what you need to do to find a cave in which a special rune stone is hidden. And that last task you obtain is to kill a stone golem, which would require us to steal a sacred hammer from the monastery. Luckily, you can kind of do every single trial in one go, because the golem you need to kill is located on a path where you are supposed to go to find that cave with the rune. And then, when you find the cave with the rune where you kill one of the novices who attacks you, you obtain the rune, go back to the monastery, tell the archmages that you've killed the golem, then that you found the rune, and as a reward, you can keep the rune. And now, because you have an empty runestone, now you can learn how to create a rune of fire arrow. And when you do, craft said rune using the runestone you got from the trial and a couple more ingredients. You then show the rune of fire arrow to the mages and voila! Now you have passed the trials and become a mage. I do want to mention that because I have started this trial early, I did mess up the sequencing for some other quests that essentially locked myself out of them. But that does not matter that much, because now I've become a fire magician. I am tasked with actually going to Lord Hagen and getting the Eye of Innos. So yeah, now that I actually can go and do that, I won't do it. Instead, I focused on leveling a bit more, now that I've obtained a better armor at least, and I also focused on doing the missing people questline. So, as it turns out, after we talk with many people who have reported that someone's gone missing, we find out that the bandits are looking specifically for us via a wanted letter, and that there is a tiny bay right next to Corinus where we find a pirate named Skip, who tells us that the pirates have been hidden on a different part of the island that's normally inaccessible. We also find out that pirates were cooperating with the bandits who have been kidnapping all these people and smuggling them to that part of the island for some reason. He even tells us the name of the bandit leader, Dexter. We know Dexter from Gothic 1, he is one of the shady traders at the old camp. Then he marks down where the bandits are hiding on a map, and with that information we can go ahead and go talk to Dexter. On the way there, we might even meet Greg, who tells us that he has business with someone around here that's a bandit. If we tell him that he's looking for Dexter, most likely, he will later show up and help us out. But now that we get to the bandit camp, we talk to Dexter, who blames us for shit hitting the fan after we destroyed the barrier, and then tells us that Raven, one of the ore barons from the old camp, survived and escaped from the old camp. Now, he also says that he is in a way thankful for destroying the barrier, so I feel like he's one of the very few people that actually are thankful to us for getting rid of the barrier. Anyway, keep in mind that in our playthrough, and canonically, the nameless hero has slaughtered everyone inside of the castle in the old camp. Me killing everyone in the outer ring of the city was just me, but canonically we've killed everyone inside the castle. Yet somehow, despite us literally murdering Raven in there, he survived and is looking for some artifact, and all these tremors around the island are his fault. And he needed slaves. So, they've started kidnapping people. Dexter is willing to let us go free if we just leave and don't talk to him ever again, but we kind of need an item that was on his body. So, when he talked to him, and he attacks us along with every single bandit in the camp. And we would be done for if it wasn't for Greg who shows up. Or well, in my case, I would have been fine because I've just cast the spell of Ice Wave that freezes everyone in a large radius so they cannot attack me. And then I just cast Rain of Fire spell that does a shitload of damage to everyone in a large radius. Unfortunately, Greg showed up and both spells hit him too. So then he grabbed aggro and killed me. So then I quick loaded and did something after talking once to Dexter, and I attacked him, which caused all of them to aggro, but I did not trigger Greg showing up, so then I did the same thing. Ice Wave into Rain of Fire, and I've killed pretty much every single enemy in that camp, getting a lot of experience. Then we pick up the letter from Dexter's body, read it, and now we have enough evidence to actually prove to Vatras that we have solved the missing people mystery. On top of that quest, we've also gotten to the ruins of an ancient civilization where we were supposed to give the water magicians an ornament that we mentioned earlier. After we get there, we meet Satras, the leader of the water mages from Gothic 1, along with every single one of the water mages from Gothic 1. Obviously, after what we've done in G1, he does not trust us, and we are shown the Ore cinematic again as an information for people who have not played Gothic 1, explaining why they don't trust us. But since Nefarious, one of the mages, tasks us with finding the remaining ornament fragments, he begrudgingly just tells us that he will observe us and our deeds carefully. And now we are tasked with finding all the remaining ornament fragments. There's 4 in total, the one we've given the mages, and then there's 3 more fragments, each placed at a different stone circle that are spread around the map. We can ask Laris for help with getting to the one that's deep inside of the woods, and then Laris escorts us all the way up to the circle and helps us with defeating a stone guardian in there. Then we head to the stone circle that is right outside of Khorinis, next to the farm that we visited at the start of the game, where we meet Cavalorn. We solved the same riddle that we did at the first stone circle. We needed to find a switch button on every arch of the stone circle that would trigger an earthquake and a stone guardian would spawn. And after we kill the stone guardian, we lure him to find one of the ornament pieces. Unfortunately, here there is no guardian spawning. So we talk to Cavalorn and he tells us that one of the farmers has done that recently. The guardian spawned and the farmers called paladins for help. And they came and killed the guardian, then took the ornament with them. That means that we are hard-locked from actually finishing that quest until we talk to Lord Hagen. Oh well. I still head towards the last stone circle, which is located in the middle of Onar's farm, where the stone guardian actually spawns, and I get help from the farmers and farmhands around it, so it's not much of a problem. Now that I have obtained every single ornament piece that I can before going to Lord Hagen, I did a lot of the quests in Act 1 and became a farm mage with nothing else to do outside of some smaller side quests. I got bored and decided to go forward with the main story. Or, well, quotation, main story. After we reach the town hall, where Lord Hagen currently sticks around, we talk to the big man himself, and inform him about the dragon danger and that we've come to retrieve the Eye of Innos to fight them. He does not believe us at the beginning, so he offers us a task. If we go back to the Valley of Mines and get a proof of said dragon problem, he will give us permission to use the Eye of Innos. We agree. And then we also ask him if he maybe has found that ornament that we were missing. Lord Hagen gives us to us because they don't find any magical value within that item. And now we begin Act 2. And you see, here's the thing. We could go straight to the Valley of Mines and do the main stuff over there. Or we could finish the whole Water Mages questline finally, and so I finished the questline for the mages. After we enter Act 2, we can finally talk to Vatras about becoming a member of the Circle of Water. Then we go to the Water Mages, hand over all the ornament pieces, they perform the ritual, and now Satras tells us that he will initiate the whole ritual of putting the ornament into where it's supposed to go, only when Vatras gives him a good to go and also confirms to him that we are to be trusted. Funnily enough, if we've by now finished the Lost People quest and I joined the Circle of Water, we already have that letter, so we just show it to him and then we go to the spot with the portal, put the ornament into the side of the pedestal, and a huge portal opens up. Then we walk through, and that is how the expansion begins proper. So, we show up on the other side after we load in, and if we go to the left, we'll leave the temple. But if we go straight outside the chamber, we'll encounter a couple of these stone guardians that so far have been very problematic to us. After we leave the temple, we meet up with the water magicians and we're told that they've already managed to set up their research operations and that they've been here for a couple of days now. Turns out the travel time inside a portal is kind of different and timey-wimey. And even though we entered first, we've left as the last one, and well, now we're here. So, we are given a task. We have to infiltrate the bandit camp to see what they are up to, but also we are told to look for special tablets left by the creators of the city, and we are told to free the slaves. We also get a small exposition explaining what we know so far. This area of the Corynus map used to be called Jarkindar and was the city of an advanced civilization that worshipped the god Adanos and got dubbed the Builders. But then they got wiped out by a giant flood and died out. That also caused this area of the island to become a damp swamp on one side of it, as the water just got stuck over there for like hundreds of years. As it turns out, pirates made this part of the island their home, and we even meet one of them right outside of our camp to the right. His name is Alligator Jack, and he's not hostile to us. He tells us that they've been observing the mages for a couple of days now, but haven't made a move on them because they did not seem to be aggressive. Then we ask him about a way into the bandit camp, and we find out that the pirates actually do have one bandit costume, so we ask Jack to lead us to their camp. We do join the pirates eventually as we get into the camp after helping out Jack with finding meat for the boys. And inside the camp, after talking to some of the pirates, we figure out that the bandit costume is in the captain's hat. And the captain is currently gone on a raid with some other pirates. Oh yeah, and the captain's name is Greg. So then we have to just get through Francis, his second in command, and when we get into the hut, loot it and leave, well, Greg shows up. We are told that the bandit costume is given to another pirate so that he can infiltrate the bandit camp due to a falling out that the two groups had over the lack of payment for the shipment, and a killing of a couple of the members of the pirate crew. Also, now that we are a part of the pirate crew, we are told to clear out the canyon that we can see close to the pirate camp out of the razor beasts. We are told that we can take some crew with us, and honestly, I highly suggest doing that. The Razor Hunt quest feels like one of the quests that are kind of supposed to power you up more than have a narrative meaning for it, even though we are told that we need to do this so that Greg knows he can trust us, and so that we can get the bandit armor. Anyway, like I said, we gather up a pirate party to follow us in a conga line, and then we walk into the canyon. And here's the thing. If we walk too far away, at times the pirates will just tell you to piss off and go back to the camp. But their area where they will follow you stretches out throughout the entire canyon. So technically speaking and realistically speaking, you should try to kill every single enemy in the canyon before you finish the last razor off, because of the same party members giving you XP thing and the pirates being clearly stronger than the player at that point. So, after clearing out the whole canyon and gaining a couple of levels off of that, we return to Greg. He tells us that we can talk to the guy who has the armor, and we also start looking for all the temples to find some clues about the creators of the city. And let me tell you, most of the time in here, being a mage is a goddamn lifesaver. You see, the spells that you obtain as a mage are so good. They have almost infinite range and ignore all armor that is not magic resistance. And most of the enemies do not have magic resistance. In fact, some of the enemies are even vulnerable to specifically fire or ice spells. Anyway, we go to each of the temples that we could find. There's 5 of them in total, including the one that bandits sit in, that contains some special colored tablets. We bring 4 of these to Sadaras, and then we find out what Raven is actually looking for in here. It turns out that the whole city was divided into 5 castes, each of them having their leader, and the council of these 5 leaders made up the rulers of the city. One of said castes was a caste of warriors, with a general named Quahodron leading them. They defended the city, and after coming back from one of these campaigns, Quahodron has brought back a magical sword of unbelievable power. And later on in his life, the council has decided that Quahodron is unable to lead the army anymore because he is too old. And normally that would mean that the new general should be elected. But instead, Quahodron was swayed by his own men that he should pass both the sword and the leadership onto his son, Radames. He does just that, and that marks the beginning of the end of the Builders. So, the sword turns out to be an artifact of Beliar, and Radames is not as strong of will as his father, so he gets possessed and starts basically a civil war. That leads to other castes of the society to be killed off, the healer sealing off the portal to the other side of the island, and plot to imprison Radames within the warrior caste temple by his own father and a high priest Cardamon, as well as one unknown leader. That leads to entrapment of Radames under the temple, but this also resulted in the deaths of Cardamon and Quahadron. On top of that, keep in mind that this whole civilization was praising Adonos as their major deity, and the corruption of the land by Beliar has caused great anger to Adonos, and this is how the civilization was wiped out afterwards. The god himself rose up and flooded this entire area for many years. Now that we know all that, Sadoras gets really riled up, as it turns out that the thing that Raven is searching for is the Claw of Beliar, a mighty weapon that can bring destruction upon the whole world. So now we have to stop him. And so we don the bandit armor and start infiltrating the bandit camp. Funnily enough, there is like a whole small quest chain that we can do to be allowed to enter the bandit camp, but instead I opted into killing the big guy in my way and brute forcing my way in. Nobody really messed with me while I did it because they are all bandits, it's all fend for yourself here, there's no real sense of community. Alright, so now I think that with all that said I can talk a little bit more about quests in this game, specifically the small amount of non-linearity to these quests. I've already talked about the negative thing with the questing system in this game, regarding how you can softlock yourself, but sometimes there's also a very positive side to the questing. You see, many of the side quests give you a choice in how you want to deal with the problem at hand, and it ranges from the very simple things like the Razor Hunt mission, where you can either go into the canyon alone and clear the whole thing by yourself, which is harder and does not really result in you getting more XP, but you can do it, or you can obviously gather up a pirate party and then deal with the canyon that way, to some other choices that you can make, like for instance, when you are dealing with entry to Greg's hut and Francis. You see, you can pay him off or you can beat him up. But also, and I forgot about this and I found it later, you can find Francis' ledger with all the numbers he's crunching, and upon reading it you figure out that Francis is in fact cheating the books. So you can threaten him with the book to let you in there. There are many quests in Gothic 2 and Night of the Raven where you do get a couple of possibilities to deal with certain things, and sometimes some solutions lead to some other things being unlocked. So all in all, I'd say that that's a very positive thing, and I wish that there'd been more of that multiple angle approach in this game, because some of the quests just beg for it. Okay, so back to the bandit camp. The hero is instantly recognized by one of the guys, and we get threatened that he'll tell everyone about our identity. So we decide to play along with what he wants from us, and he wants us to go to the guy that decides who can go into the gold mine. Yes, we knew about the gold mine, the pirates mentioned to us that they have an entire gold mine to themselves. And then we find out that the man wants us to figure out who has made an attempt on his life recently, and promises us that he will give us the red tablet, which is required by us to get into the mine. So we play a little bit of a detective, and honestly that quest is very fun. You have to talk to everyone in the camp and then decide after talking to everyone who is most likely to make an attempt on someone's life. I decided that on top of that, instead of just snitching on a guy, I actually want to get rid of the tablet guy to weaken the bandits. So we play a little detective. We also kill that one guy that threatened us earlier because he's done that again, and this time he actually tried to call attention to us. And finally, after a chain of quests and talking to some of the people that we knew from the old camp in Gothic 1, we figure out that the person behind all of this was the weapon and clothing trader from the old camp, Fisk. He tries to talk us into killing Esteban, the dude with red tablets, and tells us to tell Esteban that it is indeed Fisk that made an attempt on his life to drag Esteban's guards away, and then we can get rid of Esteban. After that, we get the red tablets to get into the mine and we meet Boris. Well, seems like the entire gang from the old camp is here, and the murder spree that I went on in Act 4 and 5 was non-canon in universe. Anyway, he tells us that whatever we are doing, he does not want any of it. And since we killed Esteban, now we gotta handle giving these red tablets to other people. Then we give the tablets to some of the diggers that are spread around the lower camp. So when we get into the upper camp and around the mine, we are told, when we try to enter the temple where the Raven is, that we cannot enter, as Bloodwind is the only one that can point out who goes where. So instead we figure out what to do around the mine. We go there, we see a ruined grave, we talk to some people who mention that they saw Raven, Bloodwind and some of the slaves go into that grave, and that there was some weird formula that was said by Raven, and then lots of screaming, and then some people were knocked out, some people were killed, and Raven came out as if he was a changed man. It felt as if some shadow overtook him. Then I went back outside of the mine thinking about what to do, and I talked to Forus. Funnily enough, you can talk him into letting the slaves go out of the mine without anyone attacking them, because again, he does not want to deal with our bullshit. So we go back to the mine, we clear out a crawler nest that ought to bring Bloodwind's attention, and then we essentially just laugh at Bloodwind trying to flex on us when we talk to him, and then we kill him and rip his head off. After that, we set the slaves that were in the mine free, and not the diggers, these guys are professional workers, of course. And we go to the temple back to the Raven's guards. Show them Bloodwind's head, they let us in, we find a new armor, and then we kill some zombies who look like Raven's guards, and after that we go to confront Raven. Except Raven has managed to enter the sanctum and we cannot follow him. So we go back to Saturas, inform him both about what happened and about how we finally freed the missing people from the mines, and Saturas enters a slight panic mode because now we gotta figure out how to enter the caves. It seems like Raven has opened up a grave of Cardamon and summoned his ghost, that was the temple inside the mine, the grave, and forced him to explain how to get to the Claw of Beliar. Now we gotta find our way in, and after talking to the water mages, we are told that we should be able to summon the ghost of Quahodron, the only other builder who knew about the entrapment of Radamon in the temple. So we get a summoning spell for the ghost, and we gotta find his grave. So we walk around the temples that we've already cleared out again, using the spell at every temple, and we finally find one that seems to be Quahodron's grave. He shows up and recognizes us as one of the Guardians of the Dead caste. That's because we were able to speak the language of the builders. But for us to get help from him, we have to answer his questions. Then he asks us a total of 7 questions about the society. And here's the problem. The answers to all these questions are written down in that temple in the Pirates Canyon that we cleared out. Every single one of the answers lie there, including the answer to the 7th question. But even if we give him the correct answer to the last question, he will consider us to be untrustworthy. The correct answer to give in the last question is, how am I supposed to know? I don't know. And honestly, I kind of have a problem with that. I would be satisfied if that question have both I don't know and the actual answer as the correct ones. Anyway, we get information on how to open a door from Quahodron, then we get informed by Saturas that the colored tablets contain clues to dealing with the traps that were left by the builders to prevent anyone from going in or out. We get in there and solve the puzzles in there. Honestly, these puzzles are quite cool. One of them is essentially a push the right button sequence puzzle. Another one tells you to follow the correct path of tiles on the floor, Indiana Jones style. And another one, you need to convince a ghost to pull a lever in a room that would kill you if you did the same thing otherwise. Instead, you stay safe in a safe spot and the ghost opens the room for you. And while I liked the light puzzle and the room puzzle, I did not like the buttons. Anyway, after all that, we come to the climax of the story. We go through a couple of rooms with enemies in them, and then we finally confront Raven. And when we confront him, we actually need to fight him in hand-to-hand combat, because he is mostly resistant to our spells. And let me tell you, for the level I was at, he was a tough opponent, and since I am playing a magician, that is not my strong suit. But the hero wins anyway, kills Raven, gets all of the loot that was on him, grabs the Claw of Beliar and leaves the temple. Then just teleports back to the main camp, talks to Sadoras about what has transpired, and we have a decision to make. We can either take Claw of Beliar with us and utilize it, or we can ask the water magicians to toss it into the ocean so no one may bear the power of Beliar again. I do not believe that tossing a sword to the bottom of the ocean would solve the problem, because hey, we're talking about gods. He might be able to summon a sea monster that would bring the weapon back, so I keep it. And now that we have finished all the quests in Jarkandar, we can get back to our main area, a little bit powered up. Okay, so before we move on to the actual Act 2 content, I just want to say that I think this expansion was done well when it comes to the narrative, although power level wise I feel like it did kind of lack. On one side you had a lot of dangerous enemies that you had to get through, and on the other side of the map you had many bandits and bloodflies to deal with. The whole thing kind of seemed like it was made for us to enter there in, let's say, Act 3 instead of Act 2, but then I will also talk about that in a bit. But overall, story pacing was good, and the entirety of the expansion content, in my opinion, tells a good story. The main task at hand originally was to set free all the kidnapped people and slaves, and then, on the way, we figured out what exactly was Raven doing, and we managed to stop him. In fact, both of these tasks were tightly connected, as to free the slaves, we had to also start dealing with Raven. Now there's one more thing to do. We need to power up the Claw of Beliar. And unfortunately, that whole thing is kind of disappointing, because if you remember from Gothic 1, we got the artifact sword Eurysiel and we powered it up. Zardas told us that we can either keep it as a sword, or turn the gem inside Eurysiel into a rune, and then we'd have a normal sword and a magic rune of Wave of Death. In Gothic 2 Night of the Raven, we do not have any choice. After we talk to Zardas about defeating Raven and obtaining the claw, we can go up to the Shrine of Beliar at the top of Zardas' tower and then pray to Beliar to power up the weapon. But the power up we get is dependent on our guild that we joined. If we were in the City Guard or a mercenary, then Claw of Beliar would remain a very strong scalable sword. Unfortunately, if you are a mage, there is no choice for you. You instantly turn Claw of Beliar into a magic rune. And to be fair, some of the spells you can perform with the rune are really good. For instance, the Summon Zombie spell, but then some of them feel useless, like the Rooting spell that only works on humanoids. Anyway, overall I consider Night of the Raven as an expansion to be a good addition to the game. It does extend the whole experience by a good 8 to 10 hours if you include the things to do in the main world. Okay, so now that we've done all in the expansion, how about we go to the main storyline now, eh? Alright, so just to recap, we were supposed to get the Eye of Innos, a powerful artifact that is capable of helping us with the dragons. Lord Hagen does not want to give us the artifact until we prove that the dragons are in fact in the Valley of Mines. So he tasks us to go there, to the castle that used to be the old camp. Paladins and the mining operations were set up over there, because they need the magic rune to fight the war against the orcs. We are supposed to get proof of dragons from the paladins over there. So now, as a fire magician, if we talk to Pyrokar, he will appoint the paladin that's been hanging out in a monastery to escort us to the pass into the valley, but we are supposed to get through the pass alone, as currently the pass is controlled by the orcs. Luckily, we are by now strong enough to slowly pick off the orcs one by one, slinging a bunch of spells at them. Also, if we were not strong enough to do so normally, there is a small tunnel that leads to an entrance we can utilize above the pass that goes through the mine. In fact, I believe that this is the intended way of entry into the valley, but since I wanted to get some more experience, I also did clear out all the orcs. Anyway, when we get back to the valley, we notice that it did change a bit. Also, the first time we enter into the valley, it forcefully turns nighttime, which I find slightly annoying as it was so dark that I barely could see anything. But We enter, and if we go down the same route we went down in Gothic 1, we would notice that there are a bunch of way more dangerous mobs in here. For instance, dragon snappers. They can kill us very quickly at the moment, but it's something that we can deal with by just tossing a bunch of ice lances. Now, if we were to turn right from the entry point, we'd go back to the place where we started Gothic 1, by being tossed into the water. This area is now filled with orcs. Anyway, back to the actual path. When we go down the pathway, we meet a scout that warns us about the orcs laying siege to the castle, as well as dragons aiding them. After a short conversation, he does give us some info, specifically that we may have a chance of getting into the castle if instead of trying to go through the front force of the orcs, we were to go and swim down the river, and then approach from the forest side. In the back of the castle there's a battering ram that was smashed into a part of the wall, and we can attempt to climb it, and it is not as heavily guarded by the orcs as well. And in fact that is what we do, and on the way there we notice that much has changed in the valley geographically as well. The forest seems almost the same as it was, but there is a giant wall at the back of it that locks out the area of the map where the swamp camp, the abandoned monastery and the fog tower were. We are told later that apparently the orcs have built that wall to lock the possibility of reinforcements via sea out, and that there is an even bigger army behind the wall. Also, the area around the new camp is now frozen wasteland, and the area behind Kavlorn's old hut is now a full-on swamp. The area where the orc castle was on top of a mountain became a volcano crater, and the fortress that Lester wanted the deed to in the first game is half ruined. Also, the bridge that led to both the orc settlement and the orc cemetery is gone, so we can no longer go there. So, we kill a bunch of monsters on the way, a couple of orcs that we can find that are either separated or kind of locked out by the water, and then we book it to the castle. In there, we do meet a couple of friendly faces, specifically Milton, but also later on we'll find Kor Angar, who has abandoned his title and is named Angar now. We also find out that Gorn is in prison, so we may pay the bailout for him. We talk to Garond, who's the paladin captain in the castle, and he asks us where are the reinforcements, and we explain to him what is going on. We need proof of dragons existing. He agrees to give us a signed letter confirming the existence of dragons, but only under one condition. We need to go out and gather information about 3 mining parties sent out to gather magic ore. Yes, that is literally the only reason why the paladins are here. So, obviously we agree, and well, let's count down what is actually going on. One of the parties is currently surrounded by a big pack of snappers. We get rid of them, they report to us how much they've mined. Another party is already dead, and the only one left is a single paladin that asks us to forward a message that reinforcements are needed and that he's guarding a bunch of crates of ore. And then the last party, or well, in my case it was the first one, but I am dealing with it as the last one. Everyone is dead there, and the only survivor left is actually our buddy Diego. He gives us info on how he ended up here, how much ore he's got, and then he asks us about the way out of the valley because he's got some business to do. So this time we escort him out of the valley, on the way killing a bunch of enemies and gaining more XP. I did skim over a couple of side quests that we can do in here, but overall this chapter I feel like is technically the shortest if we build our character correctly, because the moment we receive the letter and leave the Valley of Mines, we start chapter 3. But obviously, if you have been kind of messing around, playing the game how you want to and not hyper-optimizing, this chapter will take you a while, just because you will need to very much pick your fights. Now, before I start talking about the rest of the story, I would like to talk about the map of the world and traversal, because I feel like this needs to be addressed. The map of Khorinis is very well built. It's got enough roads that you can follow that actually lead to where you need them to lead, with a couple of smaller pathways that lead into the dangerous woods, and we have a couple of orientation points that we can see, and overall, when you start getting the hang of it, navigation around Khorinis is very easy. Except it is fun traversing and discovering the map and where everything is at the beginning of the game, because there are still enemies on the road and near the road, and there are items and areas you can explore. but the further you get in the game, the emptier the map feels. Now, do not get me wrong, the developers did take the page out of their own book, and this time with each chapter, new enemies are added to the packs around the map, or sometimes completely new enemies spawn and they may even fight with the other existing enemies, so there is some new enemies that show up on a map with each act. But because, as you will see, the whole quest line after Act 2 begins to look like a giant fetch quest and you just go from point A to point B and there's not really any incentive to go out of your way of the main quest, you spend a lot of time just running around between certain spots and there is nothing to discover anymore. Luckily, there are ways to travel faster through every single one of the maps. On the main map of Khorinis, we get these teleporters that we can use around the map that appear in the Night of the Raven add-on, although they are locked behind a mini-quest and there is a bunch of dangerous enemies around some of these portals. Essentially, these portals will lead you to the cave outside of town of Khorinis, then that one will teleport you to outside of the Dead Harpy Tavern in the middle of the map, and then that one over there teleports you straight into the temple built by the builders, just opposite of the portal to Jarkandar. In Jarkandar, you get the same portal travel system, but you need to activate it first by going to the actual destinations where portals are located, and then every portal will lead you back into the main Water Mage's encampment. It is efficient and you still need to walk to the point of interest, but it is good. It's good. And now, when we get to Act 2 and we get to the Valley of Mines, teleportation runes are introduced back into the game. We start off by obtaining a teleport rune to the exit from the valley, which is good because that very much speeds up our travel time inside the valley. Then we get another rune to the castle from Middleton, I believe, and that just leaves us needing to safely leave the castle. We also find a rune that teleports us to the abandoned tower that Zardoz used to be in the first game, but it requires us to clear it from the demon that guarded it in the first game. And I believe these 3 runes are the only teleportation runes that we can get in the Valley of Mines. Later on, in the quote-unquote overworld in Khorinis proper, we will get runes that will teleport us to Port Town of Khorinis, to the monastery, to the Valley Pass, and to Honor's Farm. We will also get a teleport rune to Zardoz. But we slowly obtain these over time. Overall, that speeds up our travel time a lot, because I'll be completely frank with you, after we get into Act 3, I do not necessarily like having to traverse all these areas. It kind of feels stretched out. But also that introduces the problem of quick travel in games, which means that because now you get quick travel and now you can just teleport from point A to point B to be where exactly you need to be, there is no point in traveling the map and discovering anything because you would just take the easier option of teleport. But yeah, to sum up my map talk. Map, very good. There's a lot of places where you can go, but because I feel like the story kind of overstays in the game, it can get a little bit tedious to traverse it towards at the end of the game. Anyway, back to the main story. Chapter 3 begins the second we walk out of the Valley of Mines with the proof provided to us by Garant. And when we walk out of the pass, we notice that both paladins that were guarding this area are dead. And there is a mysterious figure donned in black and red, a Seeker, that performs some weird spell on us and then talks to us. And at this point I figured out that while the Summon Goblin Skeleton spell cast once may not be extremely effective, if you create a small army of these little guys, even a troll will struggle with dealing with that. So I start summoning a bunch of these small guys and then let them go at the Seeker, while we also start beating him up to help the small skeletons. Now, we get back into the city, talk to Lord Hagen, he gives us permission to use the Eye of Innos, and we are told to go back to the monastery where the eye is held. And on the way there, we are attacked multiple times by these Seekers, and at some point that weird little spell at the beginning of our interaction with them possesses us, and it makes it so that we cannot sleep at night to recover health and mana. When we get to the monastery and talk to Pyrokar, first of all we are given a couple of elixirs that are capable of removing that possession, but also we are told that the Eye of Innos was stolen out of the sanctuary by Pablo, the novice that was guarding the gate to the monastery, and that we need to chase after him to recover it. So we give chase and we follow him all the way around the lake where the black troll used to be before we killed it. On the right side of that place where was the secret cave where we had to find the runestone. But now, instead of going there, we go to the left. There is a magical grove there, and we find a lot of enemies in there, including wildlife, skeleton goblins, and a lot of these seekers. Unfortunately, we are too late to stop the seekers. They perform a ritual within a stone circle and break the Eye of Innos. And when we get back to the monastery, we report that to Pirokor, and he seems taken aback by this news. And then we are told that we should ask Vatras in the city to figure out what to do now, because apparently he, as a priest of Adanos, may have an answer. On top of that, we start a new task related to the Seekers, although that one we will start by talking to Zardas as a fire mage, and after talking to Zardas, we need to talk to Pirokor. Because you see, not only is the Seeker's appearance a mystery, it turns out that some of the people living in Khorinis are also possessed by the Seekers. Now, how do you know who is possessed? Well, I'm pretty sure that this is just the error of English version of the game, but from the start of the game, the names of these characters are written in all caps, which I tried to figure out why for most of the game, but now we have the answer. In fact, we can learn both the lore of the Seekers by gathering the almanacs that these people carry, and we get even a magical letter from Pirokor that tells us the names of possessed people, and it will update over time. So, who are these Seekers anyway? You see, here's the funny thing. If we were to play as the City Guard or Paladin or the Mercenary into Dragon Hunter, we would have not gotten the quest to figure that out. In fact, if I remember correctly, some of these possessed normal people wouldn't even be possessed in the first place if we are playing as one of these classes. But as a fire mage, we do get access to these lore dumps regarding all this. So over time, we find out that most likely all these Seekers were originally people who experienced a prolonged exposure to contact with an archdemon, and their minds had to be weakened with some very powerful narcotics on top of that to become possessed. And well, does that sound familiar? Because to me it does. It sounds eerily familiar to what was going on in the sect camp in Gothic 1. And it would explain why Lester and Angar had these terrible headaches. They were not possessed by the archdemon because I believe that these two kind of stopped smoking swamp weed when they figured out what's going on in the Brotherhood, and they also got disillusioned by the sleeper. And then further possessions by the Seekers happen via these almanacs. The names of the possessed are written in there, and if someone reads it, they will slowly become possessed. And you learn all that only as a fire magician. I find this kind of class-locked world building kind of cool, so thumbs up from me, because apparently there is some more world building for other things if you play as a paladin or as a mercenary. Anyway, we report to Vatras in Khorinis, and he tells us that we could fix the Eye of Innos, but we first need to A. repair the amulet, and B. perform a ritual to imbue the Eye of Innos power back into the gem. But that requires 3 people. It requires a priest of each god, and that might be problematic. Luckily, we know powerful magicians of every god. We know Pirokor, who is the archmagician of fire. We know Vatras, who is a very powerful magician of water. And then, for Beliar, we know that Zardas is alive, the necromancer. But that also poses another problem. You see, Pirokor hates Zardas' guts, and he'd rather die than go and meet with him. So then we have to go to Zardas to ask him about some proof of his intentions, and he tells us to grab a book called The Halls of Irdorath from a chest on Onar's farm. We grab it from the place where Zardas said it would be, we give it to Pirokor to prove Zardas' intentions, and then we also need to fix the amulet itself. And it needs to be done by someone who knows how to fix jewelry. So we go to Onar's farm, because luckily we have done a different quest out of order again. You see, Bennett, mercenary smith, was accused of murder of a paladin in the city of Khorinis, and was imprisoned there. But yeah, we've luckily kind of done that quest out of order by having pickpocketed a journal that incriminated one of the men at the town hall. Apparently, that man set up the whole thing earlier, and he was paid off by the Seekers on top of that. Funnily enough, we have pickpocketed that journal somewhere in Act 2, ahead of the time before the Seekers even arrived, before that even happened, so, well, props for us, kind of time traveling stuff, huh? Anyway, because we managed to free Bennett out of order, we can now head to Honor's farm, talk to him a little bit, and he agrees to fix the amulet as a thank you for us. Then tells us to just swing by the next day. We do so, grab the amulet from him, and then we tell every mage required at the stone circle to head over there. We watch the ritual happen, then the amulet is magically fixed and Perikar explains to us how to use the amulet. Now, here's the thing about the amulet. We are told that we need to carry the amulet, which would imply that we need to actually wear the amulet, because that would allow us to talk to the dragons and interrogate them before we fight them. But, as it turns out, that is not the case. The hero can just have the amulet in his inventory and instead use an amulet that actually gives some protection against dragons. Now, our task is clear. We are supposed to go back into the Valley of Mines and kill all the dragons, but interrogate them before we do so to figure out what the hell is going on. And we also need to remember that our amulet can only force one dragon at a time to actually talk to us, and after that the eye powers down and we need to recharge it, and we recharge it by using an extract from the heart of the dragon on the amulet, and then we can continue. And you see, without further ado, let's go back into the valley and kill the dragons. And this is how chapter 4 begins. So yeah, now we get back to the valley. We notice that there are people called the dragon hunters everywhere that were lured from around the island into the valley to try to kill the dragons with promise of fame and money. We exchange a few words with them, beat up some of them because they show us some attitude, and afterwards we just teleport to the castle, tell Garen that cavalry has arrived and that we intend to kill all the dragons to relieve the paladins. So we begin the whole tour around the island to every place where the dragon is. And now I made it harder for myself because of a couple of things, and because there's not really a lot to do in this act outside of actually killing the dragons. Instead of explaining the road that the hero needs to take to each of these dragons, I'll just explain to you why I made it harder on myself and what is going on. You see, technically there is an order in which you are supposed to kill all these dragons, although you can do this without using this order. And we find out about that order by talking to a paladin in the throne room. Funnily enough, if we do kill the drakes in order, the game is fairly easy, because the first two fights you do get help. Technically you are supposed to go to the swamp first, get help from two dragon hunters over there, then after we interrogate the dragon and kill him, we teleport back to the castle, recharge the eye, talk to Garant, then we talk to Auric to get the next dragon location, which is the stone fortress. Then, on the way there, we meet Gorn, who helps us out on the way to the stone fortress. And then he tells us we need to deal with the dragon on our own. So we get help on the way, and this time we need to fight the dragon ourselves. Afterwards, we are supposed to deal with the dragon in the volcano, and at the end, the dragon in the ice valley. But you see, I messed up the order. I've gone to the fire dragon first, then to the stone dragon, then to the ice dragon, and I finished it off with the swamp dragon. So I only had help with the swamp dragon. And on top of that, I've realized that I was handicapping myself throughout the entire game. Because, you see, the devs of this game loved making certain mechanics in the game tied to the frames per second that we were getting. So, for instance, the dragons had the ability to regenerate their health, but the regen rate was very much tied to the frame rate of the game. And you see, I was playing without a frame rate cap, because I didn't really see the need for it. And boy, was I mistaken. Trust me, if you ever play this game, instantly before you even start playing, go to the Gothic.ini file and change the frame rate cap to 60 frames per second flat. Because if you have it with no cap, these dragons will pretty much instantly regenerate back to max health. And I believe that tying these things to FPS was not a problem back in the day, because when the game was released, these games were kind of struggling to get more than 40 FPS unless you had a high-end PC already, so the dragons were actually regenerating even slower. But not only is the dragon regen tied to FPS, your jumping speed and ability to jump up is also tied to FPS, meaning that unless I have capped my FPS at 60, I could not get up to the stone dragon. Funnily enough, I believe I encountered the same problem in Gothic 1, but I forgot about it. So yeah, do yourself a favor and cap your FPS before you start playing. Now, let's get something straight. With current PCs and the speed at which the drakes regen, the only viable strat to deal with them is to use summon demon scrolls or mass summon some of the things like skeleton goblins. Swarm the dragon and smack him down, overpowering him. You can also use Ice Wave spell to freeze the dragon, and well, you kind of need to use Ice Wave specifically because Ice Block spell does not work on them. But then you still need to spend a long time hitting the dragon and eventually recast the spell. If you are strong enough as a mercenary / dragon hunter and as a paladin, meaning that you've put like all your points into strength and into your combat ability with the specific weapon of your choice, you might be able to deal with the dragon without these things, but it still will be hard. But because I was running the game with Union Patch, a community mod that was patching a lot of the bugs that happened in Gothic 2, a new bug has appeared. Normally you cannot use a spell of fear on dragons, but for some reason if you have Union Patch on, you can target them with fear and they become permanently feared. Not only meaning that they won't attack you, but also they will not regenerate. And obviously, because honestly, I don't like being punished for running the game on high smooth frame rate, I utilized that while fighting with every dragon up until the last boss of the game. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. Honestly, it's kind of funny because, I mean, look at these dragons fucking go. So anyway, to give you the rundown of what these dragons are doing here. Long story short, we find out that the dragons were summoned here by the Cry of the Sleeper, but they serve a different master. Specifically, it is a chosen of Beliar, who is a fabled master of dragons. Then we find out that to beat said dragons, we will need a couple of things. In our case, we need a special rune because we are a mage, and we also need at least 5 companions with us. Then we find out that the dragon master is in the halls of Irdorath. Wait a minute, we've heard this name before, haven't we, right? So, after we kill the dragons and report them to Garond, we go back to Khorinis to talk to Zardas about the Halls of Irdorath thing. And that is how Act 5 begins. It actually begins the second we walk back into Khorinis map. And I believe that Act 5 is the shortest act in the whole game. So, what actually happens? Well, we first go to Zardas to report about what's happening and that we need to get to Halls of Irdorath. But Zardas is gone and we only meet Lester, who tells us about Zardas just leaving a lot of demons guarding the tower, and he hands us over a letter from Zardas. In the letter, it is explained to us that we need to open a book about Halls of Irdorath, and he gives us the magical spell to unlock the book. Also, he tells us that now we kind of need to do shit on our own and bye-bye. So we go back to the monastery, we report our situation to Pyrakar, then he allows us to go into the library where we find a book, open it, find out that there is a hidden pass inside the library to another chamber where Zardas has kept even more information about Halls of Irdorath, but it is guarded by the demons. So we go there, beat the enemies and find a map that would allow us to navigate to Halls of Irdorath. But it requires us to take a ship there. Luckily, there is one ship in Khorinis that we can take. We just need a crew. But before we start looking for a ship crew, we are also rewarded for our deeds by giving us the rank of an Archmage of Fire. Also, Pirakar mentions that by now he recognizes us as the prisoner who he's given the letter to at the beginning of Gothic 1, because if you remember, in the cinematic at the beginning of Gothic 1, there is a mage that hands us over a letter that we're supposed to give to Zardas, and that mage is Pirakar. Also, there is an additional thing about getting said ship. You see, Lord Hagen does not want to give us permission to use the ship, but after what we've done in Act 4, Lord Hagen finally gathers up all the paladins in the city to create a relief force for the people holding out in the castle. And that means that there will be barely any guards looking after the ship. And here we can see again that idea that there are multiple solutions to one problem, which is getting said ship. If you play as a fire magician or a paladin, you can pull your rank and authority on the remaining guarding paladins to let you utilize the ship for your mission. In fact, as a fire magician, you are allowed to enter the ship as early as Act 1 when you become a fire magician. You can talk your way onto the ship due to the relationship that exists between the paladins and the fire magicians. I mean, look at this clip.
Wait a minute. Where do you think you're going?
I wanted to...
Sorry, you can't go through here.
I want to get aboard the ship.
No one may enter the ship. I have my orders. I shall kill anyone who enters the ship without authorization. In the name of Innos, I shall defend the ship with my life.
You question the wish of a fire magician?
No, of course not. May Innos forgive me. The magicians of fire are the guardians of the wisdom of Innos. Whoever doubts them doubts Innos and forfeits any right to mercy.
What happens if I go aboard?
I shall kill, I mean, stop it.
You would attack a fire magician?
I would never lay a hand on a magician.
So, what would you do if I went aboard?
Nothing, sir.
I will go aboard now.
You mustn't do that. Lord Hagen's orders were quite clear.
Do Lord Hagen's orders include me, too?
I don't know.
Just think, would Lord Hagen dare to suspect a magician of theft?
I don't believe that.
For the last time, let me board the ship.
Understood. You may go on board.
But if you're a mercenary, you do not have that luxury. You will be threatened to be killed on sight if you try to take over the ship. And a merc/dragon hunter can have 3 solutions to that problem. If you've done a quest for Lee regarding the judge in town, Lee will suggest getting a letter off of the judge via blackmail. If that quest was not completed, then Lee will say he forged a letter himself. Both of these solutions will get our hero to the ship. Or there's a third solution. We can just kill the 2 guards and grab the ship that way. Although that solution would meet with disappointment from Vatras. Anyway, now all we need to do is find a minimum of 5 crew members and a ship captain to move on to the halls of Irdorath. And I'm pretty sure that we know exactly who we wanna take. So we essentially just recruit every single one of the boys. We obviously recruit Lester, Gorn, Diego and Milton. But on top of that we grab Lee because he's a cool guy and we've been talking about leaving this island with him since Gothic 1. We also grab Laris, as he's been helpful to us. We also take Vatras, who offers his expertise and wisdom to us. And we also take Bennett to be our smith. We could also take Angar with us, but I honestly forgot about him by now, so I didn't ask. And we also need a captain. And we have a couple of choices here. We can ask Jack, a sailor from Corinus, who is willing to do so if we clear out his lighthouse from bandits, which we did by now, and then ask Brian, Harald's apprentice, if he could safekeep the lighthouse. That is the option I go with, but you can also, for instance, ask Torlof to be your captain, which will trigger a quest, where we need to go back to the Valley of Mines and open the gates to the castle for orcs to kill off all the paladins. I am also pretty sure that we could also ask a man named Jorgen that joined the monastery in Act 4, after pirates sank his ship, but to have him as the captain, we'd have to ask for Pirakar and for permission, and then we would need to clear out Zardas's Tower of Demons that guard it. Now, to be fair, that would be a doable task, but at this point I've already committed to having Jack as the captain. In fact, I've already cleared out the demons, but again, I just thought of Jack as the captain, so that's that. Now, after everyone boards the ship, we are told to just go into the captain's cabin and take a nap. And that is how the last act begins. Chapter 6. This chapter is essentially a short epilogue chapter where we land within halls of Irdorath and have to make our way through the entire area filled with orcs, and later with the Lizardmen, and even later with the Seekers. Also killing one more dragon on the way before we finally reach the second to last chamber. And before I go over that area, I want to address one last thing. At that point, you can do one of two things. You can do what I did, which is just go through the entirety of the halls and I believe just walk back once or twice to the ship to talk to the crew like an additional time. Or after you make any progress through the halls, you may just go back to the ship and have another conversation with everyone in the crew. They usually have some valuable input, but it is not necessary to actually talk to them in the end. There definitely is some flavor I missed this way, but in the end, the last chapter had only one goal, and that was to find the Master of the Dragons and kill him, and I felt like I was already powerful, so I did not need to do everything on the island anymore. So let's just walk over what I did. Because now I'm an Archmage of Fire, I have unlocked the last circle of magic. So now my main way of killing enemies is gathering around a lot of enemies close by. Then I cast a spell of Wave of Ice to freeze all of them in place. And then I cast the Wave of Death spell, which you can recognize as the same spell we could use as a Uriziel rune at the end of Gothic 1. So most of the fights in here are fairly easy. Now, as we go deeper into the halls, we find Pedro, the traitor novice that stole Eye of Innos originally, and he tells us that he was possessed and he did not mean to do what he's done. He's been tortured, etc., etc. So we escort him to the ship and hand him over to the rest of the crew, and he tells us about a secret passage in a room where he was tortured, and we were supposed to pull the left lever and then the right lever in that room. The levers were in fact torches to open the passage further. Great. Then we had to go through an entire room of dangerous lizardmen, and wouldn't you know, sprinting around there to gather all of them in one area, then freezing them and casting Wave of Death does absolute wonders. Then, afterwards, we gather all the dragon eggs from this area to make sure none of these actually hatch because, well, that would be bad. And we confront a dragon that mentions he is a brother of the fire dragon we killed in the Valley of Mines. We do the same thing we did last time, so fear him, then just beat him to death slowly. Then there is one more mechanic that was not utilized the whole game, just like at the end of Gothic 1. We need to use a bow or a crossbow to shoot a lever that is on the other side of the chasm, so it can draw a bridge to us. It's a shame that there was no use for this mechanic anywhere else in the game. You could really do some nice short puzzle sections with that. And from now on, the only enemies you will face are either undead or the Seekers. I deal with the Seekers mostly via just running up to them and beating them to death with the Master Sword, and with larger groups of undead I deal either by casting the Ice Wave and then Wave of Death combo, or just spamming the small Firestorm spell. Now, the next room was my bane, honestly. You see, there are 4 rooms in there, or well, 4 passageways. And when we go down one of them, we need to kill a skeleton that's the Keymaster, and we grab his key, and then we solve the puzzle in these rooms. Essentially, there are 4 rooms. In each of them there were 3 switches that you had to press in a certain order, and also there were gates that were blocking certain rooms, so then you had to like go outside of the tunnel, go into like a gate control room, and then you would be able to switch the gates that open. Anyway, you had to press the buttons in each of the rooms in a certain order. And there was a journal of a black magician's apprentice that I believe I did not find in the halls, meaning that I did not have the solution on hand, so I had to just brute force my way through these. So a note for future for a potential player of the game: look for that journal to make your own life easier, dude. Don't do what I did. I spent way too long dealing with that. Anyway, after dealing with all that, 4 switches show up in the main hall, and we pull all these switches, and then one more switch shows up in front of a door, and after pressing that one, you enter a giant hall where there's a lot of these seekers. And after dealing with the seekers, we can talk to a black magician that stands in front of the giant closed door. He then tells us that he will not let us go through, obviously, and if we are a fire mage, which we are, we can also use a little bit more dialogue on him and figure out that he indeed used to be one of the people who worshipped the sleeper. Okay, now that we have dealt with that magician, we can go ahead and deal with the last threat, the Master of Dragons. And we walk in there and fight a giant undead dragon. Yes, the main bad of this game is a giant undead dragon. And the entire dragon fight is no different from other dragon fights, except this time I had to summon more demons to fight the dragon. And then when we kill the dragon, we get the cinematic. Yes, Zardas pops up, and it seems as if he absorbed the power of the dragon on his own and then teleported out. Well, after that we walk back to the ship, talk to the crew members about our success, and we set sail for Myrtana. And that is the end of the game. So, was Gothic 2 Night of the Raven any good? Well, yeah, I had lots of fun playing it, even though it was definitely harder than Gothic 1. The gameplay was fun, interacting with everyone on Cornus was fun as well, and in fact I can tell you right now that I have either skipped over some interactions to not spoil everything to everybody here, or I just missed many interactions within the game myself. There definitely is some new stuff added with each chapter of the game. In fact, that is what I would recommend to all of you who are going to play Gothic 2. Whenever you start another chapter, go back and check out some of the places you've already visited. Sometimes you can find new enemies there, or just find some new things, or start new quests. In fact, I can tell you right now that out of curiosity, before I moved on to Halls of Irdorath, I have even gone back to Jarkandar just to check out what is going on in there, and then the entire area over there was overrun by more powerful monsters, so that was a lot of additional XP for me. But yeah, mechanically the game plays very similarly to Gothic 1, except the human AI got slightly dumber. In Gothic 1, if the enemy was way too strong for a human, for instance, if there was an orc attacking a digger, the digger would just drop everything and start sprinting away out of fear. In Gothic 2 Night of the Raven, everybody just kind of stays fighting until one falls over and dies. That is one thing that I did not like about the NPCs in Gothic 2, but overall everything else was basically an improvement over Gothic 1, regarding combat and both friendly and hostile NPCs. Regarding the story, while there definitely were more quests in Gothic 2 than in Gothic 1, I do have a couple of pointers, both positive and negative, regarding all that. You will find the highest amount of quests to do in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, because these two chapters very much incentivize the player to go around the whole island, talking to everybody, which is very good in my opinion, and it helps with world building. Now, in later chapters, you can find many other quests to do, but unfortunately many of them are locked out for certain players because they require affiliation with a specific guild. But well, there's still plenty to do in the world later on in the game, so unlike in Gothic 1, that's also a thumbs up. But that means that now you kind of need to go out of your way to look for these things as well. And like I mentioned earlier about traversal, it can be a pain. So I would recommend just walking around and visiting other areas of the map in every chapter, because you may find just some cool, flavorful quests and interactions that you would miss otherwise. But unfortunately, after being so far in the game, I started feeling tired because the main plot of the game is not that strong, and I kind of just wanted to move on to the next main quest and resolve whatever the hell was going on. In fact, I would argue that the plot of the expansion was slightly better and more thought through than the main game. Night of the Raven's plot went from a story where we tried to find the missing people into discovering the reason why these people were kidnapped in the first place, then lead us to finally discovering Raven's plan and stopping him, while also saving all these missing people that were still alive. Meanwhile, the story of the main game essentially can be boiled down to: there are evil dragons that were summoned and need to be killed, but first we need to chase after a MacGuffin for the first 3 chapters of the game, then finally beating the unbeatable otherwise enemies, quote-unquote, in chapter 4, where we find out that they all have an even stronger boss that needs to be killed, and then we can technically slap chapter 5 and 6 together, as they both are very short and basically relate to the very same thing. Now, please do keep in mind that while I do criticize the plot of the main game, I still very much enjoyed it, even though towards the end of the game I felt like it was dragged out. I'm also willing to think that if I played only the base game without Night of the Raven, then I probably would not get as annoyed towards the end, but well, there's a reason why the expansion was made, right? Oh yeah, I was also supposed to talk about difference between going to Act 2 area first and Jarkindar. And you see, both of these areas are hard for a character that has just finished chapter 1, that did not just clear the entire map out of every single enemy that you can possibly clear. So whether you go to Jarkindar or to Act 2 to finish that stuff, and then in Act 3 go to Jarkindar, I don't think it makes as much difference as I originally thought, but then also Jarkindar has that giant canyon quest that lets you like power level twice or thrice, so I don't know, I feel like you are supposed to go to Jarkindar before you do stuff in the Valley of Mines. But that's enough of the campaign. Let's again talk about the map. And I just want to say that the map of this island is so memorable. It is still a very well-built map to today's standards. When you look at the map itself compared to modern standards, every single area, the Valley of Mines, Khorinis and Jarkindar alike, all of them are fairly compact, and it does not take long to traverse from one end of the map to another. I've seen a video where someone runs across the whole map of Khorinis, I mean the main map, in about 8 minutes. Of course, that was not a loop, that was just a run along the roads and then in a straight path to the edge of the map, but that still is not a giant map, obviously, and yet it does feel like the game is full of different spots and it makes the world feel big. So yeah, the map is very much a plus. And obviously the controls of the game are the same as in Gothic 1, so there is no real change here. So if you go to used to Gothic 1 controls, which they are confusing at the beginning, but as you get used to them, they are not as terrible. You will be fine in Gothic 2. Alright, I would say that in the end, Gothic 2 is a really good game, and I would say that I can recommend playing it at least once. In fact, I might finally get around to do a full playthrough as a paladin as well sometime in the future. Also, I was thinking about also doing a playthrough of Gothic 3 at some point without the add-on this time, as apparently the expansion was not directly made by Piranha Bytes, therefore I don't think it would be good. But honestly, I've already tried playing through Gothic 3 before like 4 or 5 times, first without Steam and then with Steam, and On Steam, I've got 4 hours played and I just could not be asked to continue. I don't know why. But hey, I'm not gonna say never. If you want me to play through Gothic 3 at some point, say it down in the comments below. I will also be streaming this week, although it will not be Gothic. It will be my playthrough of Prince of Persia Warrior Within and possibly Two Thrones, because I do want to play through these games already and make videos out of them next. So yeah, if you have any suggestions on what games you'd like to see, write in the comments, and while you're at it, leave a like, leave a sub, put the notifications on. I've worked really hard on this video, so I would love to see what you guys think about it. And I'll see you either during the streams or in the next video. Bye bye.